President Obama is coming to Springfield to talk to legislators who are still at odds with our governor. We'll talk about it next on Capitol View. Welcome to Capitol View, the program where we talk about state issues, sometimes federal issues, and how they just might affect your life. I'm Bernie Schoenburg from the State Journal-Register. We're going to have a lot of state and federal this week with the president coming to talk to the legislature. Anyway, with me today, Bruce Ruston is back, from a reporter with Illinois Times here in Springfield. Welcome back.
Thanks for having me.
Jordan Abudayyeh is here. She is State House reporter for WICS-TV, also known as News Channel 20. Jordan,
thank you for having me.
Thanks for coming. President Obama coming to town, what do we make of this? Jordan, apparently your station's going to have a little coverage.
Yeah, we are covering the president quite extensively. Hey, this is a historic visit. To me, it feels like the principal coming to the classroom to yell at the students. You know, Illinois is kind of embarrassing. If I was the president, I'd be embarrassed. So I think
is that why you think he's coming?
I think he's going to come and probably lay down the law a little bit. Now, some people are saying, does he really have the chops to do that? You know, he went to Washington and things are more partisan than ever, some would say. So I think it's going to be an interesting day.
Bruce?
Well, I don't think he's going to say much of, frankly, anything that's going to make a difference, number one. If he does come and deliver start doing business, it's going to be in very, I think, diplomatic terms. And why they would pay attention to that, I'm not quite sure. So we'll see. I mean, it would be actually perhaps more effective if CWLP shut off the power in the middle of his speech. Now that would actually get some folks' attention, but I don't see that happening. I'm kind of mystified about why he's coming. I'm glad he's going to be here, but I can't quite fathom why he's doing it. But a presidential visit is better than no presidential visit.
Being the sentimentalist that I am, I think there's a little sentimentality to it.
The goodbye tour.
That's right. He's getting into his last year, or he's in his last year in office. He announced in Springfield. He spoke in Springfield around Abraham Lincoln's birthday for Abraham Lincoln dinner, just a few days after being inaugurated for his first term. And I think he wants to come back, and I think he still, if you listen to the State of the Union address, he still thinks we can all work together and hopes to be optimistic and hopes not to make enemies of the other side.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. The February 11th date is auspicious.
All, Lincoln is a big thing to him, and I remember how cold it was the day he announced, and we had it covered. This is when I learned what foot warmers were, when you put them in your socks. And there was some talk back then of having the speech moved, because it was like 10 or 11 degrees outside, into the Prairie Capitol Convention Center. And David Axelrod, in his book, who was a big advisor, I believe it was in his book, but I've heard it elsewhere also, they really didn't want to move from where the speech was, because they want that tape still running today of Barack Obama announcing for president with the old state capitol where Abraham Lincoln served in the background. And, a few toes froze, but he got that done, and those iconic. So we'll see what happens.
We dug that tape out. We've run it a few times.
A few times, and I'm just wondering. I know that I guess Governor Rauner is hoping to have a beer with the president, but would the president, with this ultimate battle going on between the General Assembly and the Republican governor and the Democratic General Assembly over the budget, again, we don't know if this is going to move the needle on that.
If they do have a beer, hopefully the president will pick up the bill.
Well, there you go. This would be the Springfield issue where
Correct.
He was supposed to pay for I guess about $50,000 worth of arrangements the city made and security that was never paid. And Jim Langfelder has talked about it. Let's maybe just look at the good of having presidents and Donald Trump's come to town and we provide these services.
But Trump did pay his bill. I checked on it.
Was that right?
Yeah, he's
okay.
paid.
Do you know how much it was?
Not that much. It was the minimum for the Prairie Capitol Convention Center. I want to say not more than a couple, $3,000.
I think it was $5,000 to rent the hall.
Yeah,
okay. Well, that was to rent the hall.
Sure.
Yeah.
Something's better than nothing.
Okay. Well, let's get back now to the unfortunate reality of Illinois with no budget into its 8th month now. One of the things that happened this week is President Cullerton, President of the Senate, John Cullerton, said he was going to give the governor time on the bill that the legislature passed to spend like $700 million, part of which for the grants to students going to college, MAP grants, and also to pay for community colleges, which haven't seen any money. None of the colleges in the state have seen money since July. And then the governor at a press conference on another issue said, doesn't matter how long he waits, whenever they give me the bill, I'm going to veto it because there's no funding source. So, and the governor's still talking about the turnaround agenda, and the Democrats are still saying, be reasonable. In our view, we can't do those things like erode collective bargaining rights at the local level. So where do we go from here? Jordan?
There are some days when I show up to work and I wonder if any progress has been made at all. It seems like everyone is still on the same talking points they were a year ago. And I don't see anyone trying to move towards the middle at all, the governor or the Democrats who control the General Assembly. The fact that you're going to say, okay, I'm going to give the governor some time to think about this bill. He already said he's going to veto it. So what kind of political game are we playing? And the idea, that the Republicans say that the bill has no funding source is true. The comptroller is coming out and saying the state has no money. So if you want to fund MAP grants, then I can't cut checks for someone else. Anyone else who needs any sort of funding. So at this point, just get a budget done. I don't understand why we're still in this spot, but it doesn't seem like it's happening anytime soon.
How long is it going to last, Bruce Ruston?
There'll be no budget passed, my prediction is, until after the fall election. I think it's going to take that long.
You think they will pass one then?
No,
I don't mean to laugh because...
No, after the fall election, I didn't put a limit on it. It could be 2017, 2018, after the, I don't expect
the
to
next
see it.
governor's election is 2018.
Yeah, I think there's a glimmer of hope perhaps after the primaries, and we have a little bit clearer picture about how the fall elections are going to shake up. So I think there's a glimmer of hope for that. But realistically, these folks are just so far apart. I think Jordan's exactly right. We're having the same conversation here on CapitolView that we were having nearly a year ago. What are they doing? You know? So.
And Leslie Munger, the comptroller who was named by Governor Rauner, after the death of Judy Bartopinka, who got elected and then before her new inauguration to another term passed away, unfortunately, late in 2014. Leslie Munger has done a bit of a tour telling people that the budget hole is growing because we're still spending about 90% of the state budget based on last year's numbers. Plus the education budget that actually added more money, and that's the only part of the budget, the K through 12 budget that the governor signed. She says we're digging the hole about $6.2 billion deeper because also we used to have a 5% income tax. Now it's down to 3.75 on individuals. She says if you only tried to fill the budget hole we have now, and we might have a backlog of bills of like $10 to $12 billion by July that are unpaid and waiting to be paid, it would take maybe something like a 7% tax, or 8, I think she said, higher than the 5, and that's not the way to go. And she's not really taking sides, but she was appointed by the governor, and she's traveling around and she's trying to bridge the gap and says everybody should just get in a room and talk. But they got in a room once, then they tried to get in a room again, and Mike Madigan didn't show up, which the governor bashes him for, and Madigan said he had something else to do. So again,
they got in a room and talked, and their talking was saying bad things about each other. So that's negotiating.
And everybody is lamenting the fact that we're seeing layoffs at colleges, and Chicago State University on the south side of Chicago is talking about closing in July or whatever, not having enough money to operate. Where do we go? I guess it's the same question in a different way.
It's just very odd because I think, I believe when I talked to the governor at some point in the last couple months, he's actually talked about how well he's managing this. That, we don't have a budget, but it's being managed. And, with 90% of the budget going out the door, and they are trying to manage it, but there's this weird 10%. Every other day you hear of small organizations that are shutting their doors or things you don't think the state funds on an everyday basis, and a lot of people are hurting. So while it does seem managed and it seems like, hey, we could probably last without a budget for a few more months, it is really hurting people on an everyday basis.
Right. Well, all of our media outlets are doing stories on, Dean Olson, who does our medical stuff for us, just did a big thing on autism and people who are not getting the services that they were for their autistic kids because the Hope Institute isn't getting the grants that it uses for those socialization services and, regular classes for the kids. And then I see some commenters in the paper, it's just, the Democrats don't want to work with Rauner, but the governor says, short-term pain is necessary. But the collateral damage just continues to build, and we'll see where it goes. I should mention it's a bit out of the central and western Illinois territory that mostly sees this show, but the governor also kind of made a big deal about he wants to take over Chicago public schools, and he thinks they should go bankrupt, and then they would need a change in law to do that because the state can take over small districts, but as they often do with legislation that was passed in the past, Chicago is exempt because it's so big and represents so many people. And then President Cullerton said it's not in the law, it's not going to happen. So that it's just they're fighting over this giant issue up north, which again just seems to indicate they're not getting along.
Well, if they run the Chicago public schools as well as they've been running the state government lately, what's the advantage to a takeover?
Well, that's what at the union in Chicago.
I see this as more posturing and peacocking. I don't see it as anything real serious that's ever really going to transpire.
I think people thought that Chicago would put pressure on the lawmakers, all of the problems that Chicago faces, to finally get a deal done. But that hasn't happened. So I think the takeover idea is another political way to say, hey, look, this is what I want to do. This is my part of the game. What's your move back? And I think, everyone thought, hey, if we just let Chicago's schools fail and they get that pressure, Madigan and Cullerton will cave. It's their district, it's their area. But that didn't work out so well.
Well, yeah, and it does seem that, the governor has specifically said, I want the mayor of Chicago, Rahm Emanuel, and they used to do business together for a while, to put pressure for my turnaround agenda for the reforms I want in the structure of the way things work in Illinois, including term limits and remap reform and all of that. I want him to go to the Democrats he knows and put pressure, and Rahm Emanuel says, I'm not going to do it because we don't believe in that. And we're again left with another friendship that's not helping, or another friendship that used to be. We'll see where that goes. President Cullerton has also said if you want to really turn around Illinois, it should be about education, and we need to move education funding to be more equitable. And that's interesting because Andy Menard, state senator from Bunker Hill in Macoupin County, has been pushing that for more than a year. Governor Rauner, in his conciliatory parts of his State of the State message, also said he wanted a fairer way to balance that. And then Speaker Madigan has announced an education funding task force to look at it this spring. And I'm not sure how hopeful that is because he mentioned Cullerton is great, but Cullerton says to get a budget deal, we need funding reform. So when will this all happen? Anyway, is something going to happen with it?
I feel like we had a plate, and on our plate was the budget, and then we put turnaround agenda on top of it. And now I feel like slowly the Democrats are adding education funding reform, and Rauner wants pension reform, and we're putting more and more things on the plate, and you guys couldn't even handle the one thing you had on there first. So to me, it just seems like this is getting more and more complicated. If we're going to get a budget deal, we have to have the school funding. That is extremely controversial.
Well, they haven't done it in 17 or 18 years.
Yeah, you haven't done it for 20 years. What makes you think you're going to do it? Like, I don't understand.
Because, look, they got a task force now. Don't you understand? There's a task force.
The Senate had a task force.
Yeah.
Years ago.
Well, and interestingly, Senator Menard, had hearings all over the state before he came up with his plan. But because some, particularly the richer school districts in the suburbs, were losers, the Republicans went ballistic and said, we're not going to do this. And the governor even said, we want school reform and more equitable funding, but nobody should lose, which means we need more revenue. But we're already down, as Leslie Munger, the comptroller, said, we're going to be $6 billion more in the hole, and it grows every day because we have no budget.
Everyone wants their piece of reform, but no one's willing to work for it. So let's just keep piling it on the plate and call it a day. It's not getting anywhere.
Again, when I hear task force, I hear back burner. Menard, I think, did remarkably well getting his proposal as far as he did. Why not build on that? But it sounds like Madigan wants to press the reset button.
Well, in the middle of all this, the governor has been proposing new things. One of them was procurement reform, which was we should streamline the process so people can sell goods to the state without taking so long, and really wants to tear up some of the red tape, which was really post-Blagojevich, when there was all this problem. And another thing that he announced was a new economic development nonprofit group that would help promote the state and work with the Department of Commerce, but that would also need Democrats to go. And he made that announcement in Chicago or up north. He did an executive order because Speaker Madigan of the House, the Democrat that runs the House, had said, we'll go along with this last session, but we want it to sunset in 3 years. We want it to last for 3 years, see how it does, and then reauthorize at that time. The governor's like, I'm not going to bring in superstars to run this private economic development agency to do deals with people who would then be approved by the state unless they know it's for good, although, of course, the governor, he has to run for re-election after another 3 years also. So do we see this continuing to work? I mean, was it the right way to go, an executive order? Certainly people don't like when
I feel
President
like he's
Obama...
taking a page out of Obama's book. Like, no one will work with me, so I'm just going to try and do this myself, which is what it felt like with the economic development arm. He has really been wanting that. He comes from the business community, and he really thinks that's the way to go. But to Speaker Madigan's point, you know, they have these in some states across the country, specifically Wisconsin. It did not work out. It is.
I think Wisconsin is like where they had the biggest problems with
Right.
conflicts of interest
Yes,
or something, but in some other states I think they said it did better.
So some it works, some it doesn't. The governor said, hey, we looked at the places where it's working and we modeled ours after that. And that's not to say that it won't work. I mean, obviously Illinois does need to work very hard to bring jobs here. Nobody's disputing that fact. But it seems like the governor is now moving towards doing stuff on his own instead of trying to work with people, which, can you blame him at this point? But
we'll see where it goes. Bruce, I know you have been writing about expenditures from campaign funds, including from Frank Martino, who was a longtime legislator, who took the place of his father, late father, who was a longtime legislator, but he's now the new Auditor General, and he was very popular as he got into that role. But talk a bit, if you wish, about what his campaign fund looks like.
Well, the issue here is that his campaign fund and what's he spent, the biggest issue has been he spent in excess of $210,000 at a gas station in his
over
district.
a number of years.
Since in the past decade, roughly 10 years, 9 months, something like that. But the amounts were in interesting forms, even numbers, $1,100, $1,200. Plus, during that same period of time, he also collected, I checked, in excess, I believe, of $20,000 in state mileage reimbursements. And so the more you look at his campaign fund, the weirder stuff gets in some regard. For example, a bank, Spring Valley City Bank, he was paying that bank tens of thousands of dollars for poll watchers. When he went to Chicago, he was paying the bank $400 for parking expenses, meeting expenses, and so it just wasn't keeping very good track of money at the very least. The State Board of Elections confirms that these reports are not proper, at least in the way the money has been reported. I've been told directly by the State Board of Elections, no, you can't report giving money to a bank for such expenses as poll watchers. And so this story has gotten a few legs. The Champaign newspaper has called on him to explain himself. There's been a little bit of coverage up in Chicago. And so what he has done is he's retained a public relations specialist expert to explain himself. But the problem is that was, I think, more than a week ago, and we've heard nothing. And so...
Well, I saw a statement that, you know, he believes he spent appropriately.
Correct.
And it was from that consultant.
Correct, yeah. But he did issue an opening statement saying, I've done nothing wrong, the money was all spent properly, and we'll be coming up with a more detail, I'm paraphrasing here, we expect more soon. And we've heard nothing. And so the question is, first off, you've got to keep this in context. It's really the wild, wild west in Illinois when it comes to campaign spending, and this has been going on for a number of years. It's not just Mr. Martino that has been spending money. It's in a head-scratching sorts of ways. Some folks might describe it that way. The Chicago magazine, Better Government Association, did a pretty good story a couple of years ago documenting just how loose the laws are in terms of spending campaign money. They're pretty tight when it comes to reporting them quickly and how it comes in.
They have tightened up over the years.
They have, yeah.
I remember former Senator Frank Savickas, when I was working on a story back in the early 90s, and he had moved to Florida, and he had, I think, part of his campaign fund had been used to buy a Cadillac at that time.
There was a
but it's pretty clear. After 1998, they changed the law, so you can't convert it to personal use, because it used to be you could convert campaign money to personal use and pay taxes on it as income.
Well, two
and
examples.
They can't do that anymore.
Jesse White, for example, who's well regarded, I think rightly so, used campaign funds to buy a GMC Yukon, according to this Better Government report. Jesse White has a state car. Why does he need a Yukon? And it's my understanding, he lives in Chicago.
Well, perhaps it's a campaign thing, and you're not supposed to use your state car campaigning, I'm sure.
I'm
just saying.
Yeah, just saying. But there was, and you're right, it has tightened up. There was a legislator in the early '90s who uses campaign funds for his funeral. I mean, that apparently is you could no longer use your campaign funds to bury yourself. But
I do think it does raise some interesting questions.
Sure,
do the laws need to be tightened up even more? I mean, if things are legal or legal-ish, politicians are going to do them. We've seen that at the national level, we've seen that at the state level, and even the local level. People are always going to push the boundaries. So do the laws need to be tightened up? Sure, I think this is a perfect example of that. Another part of this is that it's taking a little bit of a partisan spin. So I've had sources call me and say, well, we were a little bit strong-armed by the Republicans to vote for Martino's confirmation. We were uncomfortable with it. And
By the Republicans?
yes.
I mean, he's a Democrat.
Yes,
Yeah, he's a
by
Democrat.
the Republican leadership.
There were only 10 no votes.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, and now some of us are freaking out
I see.
and wishing we didn't do that. So I think that's kind of, we're starting to see the inside workings of it spill out a little bit.
I mean, at the very least, I think it could be termed ironic that the man who is now in charge of keeping track of public money didn't do a very good job of keeping track of his own, at least, in terms of properly saying, at least by what we're told by the Board of Elections, which is you cannot report these payments to the bank. That if you're going to pay for poll watchers and parking in Chicago, you should be saying it went to a parking garage or it went to the Acme Poll Watching Corporation, something
And
like that.
it also, well, these reports have been out there all of these years too.
Which
so
is
it also
another
depends,
excellent point.
If you have an opponent or if you have a reporter that takes a look, then questions might.
And he
have come
had a
out
very
earlier,
tight
so-
race in 2014.
Yeah.
I think he won by less than 200 votes, and that's the other thing that's a head scratcher. And is that this has never really been an issue
Yeah.
until now.
Well, welcome to the big time. Anyway, we'll take a look as time goes on. The governor recently turned thumbs down again on expanding the list of ailments that medical marijuana can be used for. I know there was some kind of demonstration at the Capitol during some of this other budget craziness where people are saying, I know PTSD, soldiers with head injuries, et cetera, brain trauma, want to be able to use medical marijuana, and it's not happening yet. The governor just seems to be letting the pilot go at a very low level and doesn't want to expand it, even though there's a state board that has recommended several other ailments that could be listed. So where do we go from here? Is that just going to...
Well, I think, frankly, the governor can make a good argument that, look, it's a pilot program. It's got, I think, at least another year left to go. We have time to let it work as it's, as it was originally, proposed. The legal sales have only been taking place, I think, since November. So perhaps we don't want to go too far too fast here. On the other hand, you've got 4,400 patients out there that have cards. Those aren't enough patients/customers to sustain the industry.
Right, and a lot of people have invested a lot of money in these new dispensaries, et cetera,
Well,
including Springfield.
clearly that investment was made, I think, with an eye toward eventual, frankly, legalization of recreational marijuana. That would be the nirvana, quote unquote, form. But I don't think they were doing this with an eye toward this can be profitable with just this small list of ailments. But even with this small list of ailments, there are dramatically fewer patients than had been anticipated.
And half of that is because it's so hard the way the law is written to get that medical marijuana card. You have to see the same doctor for 2 years who's going to recommend you. It's one of the strictest laws in the nation. And so we made it very difficult for people to get medical marijuana, and the program was only short term. So I think some people are saying, do I bother? Do I even try? I know some hospitals have just said we're not going to give this out entirely. So I think there's a lot of questions with the program, and I think if the governor has shied away from social issues mostly. So I think he probably just doesn't want to foray into that and say, hey, let's just let this program play out. But if we're just going to let it play out the way it is, I think in a year when it expires, we're going to have to go back and look at it.
I mean, that's an excellent point. There are some wacky things in this law, and I think they are wacky. For example, you have to go to the same dispensary. You can't just go, if I have a card, I have to sign up for the one dispensary, and I can't go buy it any place I want to. Now, I can change, and in fact, this new one that's opening up here in Springfield, I understand, is going to have a kiosk to allow you to do exactly that. But if you're on the road and, oh, geez, I'm out of weed, I better stop at the nearest,
or cookies or oil.
Well, you'd know more about that than I would. But the thing, you can't just stop anywhere and get your supply, so to speak. And why they would do that, I don't know. But I mean, it's extremely restrictive. If you want to be participating in this program, you have to submit your fingerprints to the government. That's pretty heavy stuff.
It is heavy indeed. I know that, as Bruce mentioned earlier, maybe until after the next election, maybe next November, we might not have a budget. As elections go, there's one particularly interesting one around central Illinois. Part of Springfield is included in the 50th Senate District. Sam McCann is the Republican running, and he's an incumbent, Republican, conservative in most ways, except he's voted with unions on some things. And Bryce Benton is a state trooper, and he's on the Convention Center board, Prairie Capital Convention Center. they have been fighting over who's endorsing who, and Benton is getting a bunch of money from a political action committee run by Dan Proft, who is getting money from one of the big backers of the governor, and McCann is getting a lot of union money. So this is going to be one of the test races in the state. Where's that one going to go? Any ideas yet?
No, I think it has potential, I think, to be very tight. I'll go out on a limb and say that McCann wins, but he is going to face a ton of money. And running
this Dan Proft group, and Proft is a conservative radio talk show host in Chicago. They've already put $325,000 into advertising and other things.
Sure, yeah, and it's never fun running against a cop, because they police, rightfully so, are fairly well respected in at least in Central Illinois, and particularly he's an Illinois State Trooper, and the Illinois State Police have a good reputation, and so it's going to be hard for him.
But since Governor Rauner took office with that immense war chest, people have been waiting. They've been looking at every way he's spending money, and groups tied to him are spending money, and everyone thought like he would use it to punish people who went against him. And Senator Sam McCann was one of the only Republicans to do this. And
yeah,
so,
he's the only one in the Senate that voted for arbitration for AFSCME and which was overridden in the Senate but not in the House.
Right, so he's one of the only people to take that stand, and now he's being punished for it. So I think it's a warning sign to other lawmakers at this time, and I think McCann's very popular in his district. A lot of people like him, and having labor behind you is still a big thing in Illinois.
Well, we'll see how it goes. I mean, in Springfield, in the primary in 2014, a lot of Democrats who are union people crossed over to vote for Kirk Dillard, who was a senator running for governor, and Dillard got like more than, I think it was like 65% of the voters, 67 in Sangamon County, and Bruce Rauner got 19. But then the county ended up going for Rauner in the general election, but union people flocked to support someone who was not Bruce Rauner at that time. We'll see if that happens again, and this district isn't just Sangamon County, it's bigger than that. We'll see where it goes. I guess we've got a little time left. We're getting pretty close to the March 15th primary. Is the presidential election going to, are we going to become another Iowa? Or are we going to matter this year?
We might actually matter. We might actually matter.
And it's interesting to watch Donald Trump, who had 10,000 people fill the convention center, but he took second in Iowa, and he's been,
well, I mean,
angry.
Is it worth asking the question, if we do matter, does this have any kind of potential to divert resources that might otherwise have gone towards state campaigns? I mean, I don't know.
And we'll have to see. And with that, we're about out of time. Bruce Ruston, Jordan Abudayyeh, thank you for your help and your conversation. I'm Bernie Schoenburg. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time on Capitol View.